स्टाइलिंग करा रही है। एक मिनट यहाँ पे देखिए लाइट के पास लुक सेंटर सामने यहाँ पर थैंक यू। यहाँ पर लुक सेंटर
यह सेंटर
थैंक यू। यहाँ पे सामने देखिए
सारा जी है।
एक बुक रख दीजिए। हाँ सेंटर यहाँ पे हाँ हाँ थैंक यू।
Briefly on stage is Annabel's fabulous literary agent, Jaipriya. May I ask you to please be on stage so that we can unveil the book and then we will start the conversation. So, basically unwrap the book and photo op.
Hello everyone. Good evening.
Hello.
Okay, great. Okay, are we all settled? Yeah, perfect. It's a lovely paragraph, perfect.
First, I should say, I feel rather strange sitting in a bookshop when I didn't actually write the book. I'm incapable, totally incapable of writing. So the book was written by my dear friend Georgina Brown, who sadly is in England. She's not here, but she's with us in spirit tonight. So I just wanted to clarify that before we begin. She and I spent a lot of time talking, and the book was a result of a lot of talking, which we'll probably go into. I came to India to find out whether I could live here. In 1966. So I'm going to read just a little bit about when I came. I came to see whether I could live here. And I've already been here for a couple of months. And I'm having to make up my mind whether I could actually live the rest of my life. Is that better? Sorry, I'm new to all this. Nearly 2 months had passed, and I liked Bombay well enough. Now I had to decide whether I could spend the rest of my life here. Then one day I caught myself singing, "Hey, hey, dil ki mushkil, jayla, yahan, zara hat ke, zara bach ke, ye hai Bombay, Mary Jaan." A song from CID, a Hindi movie, which translates as, "Oh my heart, it's very difficult to live here. Be careful, be warned, this is Bombay, my love," which had recently become the city's unofficial anthem. Was it because it was sung to the familiar British tune of "Oh my darling Clementine," or that Bombay was beginning to get under my skin? Both, perhaps. My only worry was boredom. I didn't even have to make my own bed. Never mind shop or cook. As a dyslexic, I'd never been a big reader. As a girl, I had spent hours playing the piano and making silly crafty things such as sandals out of raffia or cooking. Here, there was no piano, nothing to make, and no place for me in the well-staffed kitchen. I found myself wondering if I could be happy living here long term. I must have wondered about this out loud at some stage, and possibly even grumbled about being abandoned, because Anand suddenly told me with a smarting frankness that if I was to marry him, I'd have to make my own life here and not rely on him for company, since he would be busy with work and bridge and had no intention of changing his habits. It stung at the time, but once I recovered, I felt grateful that he had called a spade, exactly what you would expect from a bridge champion. I can't remember when I did eventually make up my mind. Somehow both of us just drifted into certainty. Anand didn't go down on one knee and give me a ring. I always said he just assumed I would marry him. And he was right, as he always is. We became engaged on the 16th of July.
I love that excerpt so much. And I think it's such a good thing that he said that, because your whole journey started because of that, and we'll get into it. Your whole journey with the NGO, all the friends you made, wonderful life you made here. But before that, Sara has also prepared a passage, so why don't you go?
So this is also from Granny's book. I landed in Bombay on 25th March, standing at the top of the steps of the plane in a short blue Mary Quant style skirt. I felt a blast of humid Bombay air, hotter and wetter than I have ever experienced. The sky looked like boiled milk. I was used to greyness, gloom and cold. I took my first breath of India. Petrol fumes, sewage, rotting garbage, all rather intense and mildly nauseating. I quickly discovered that, like most things Indian, there is always a flip side to the bad. In this case, the heady scents of tuberoses, frangipani, and jasmine in the garden at Anand's house. Anand met me in a Chevy Bel Air, a ridiculously long turquoise and white car driven by Rama, one of the Mehta family's drivers. Rama's father had been the driver before him. I have always been a bit of an anorak about motor cars. So, while everything else is a bit of a blur, I vividly remember noticing the cars on my first drive from the airport. Most were ambassadors, very like the British Morris Oxford I had left behind, and the traffic moved reasonably fast along the main roads. It doesn't do that anymore. In the garden of the bungalow on Warden Road in Breach Candy, the extended Mehta family had gathered to greet me, curious about the English girl Anand had invited to stay. Crypto, the family Labrador, lay twitching in the sun and didn't bother to introduce himself. Ever since Anand's return, his mother had been asking each morning, "Baba, when are we going to meet Annie?" Anand was 26 years old, and like so many eldest sons in India, he had been nicknamed Baba from birth. Apparently, his youngest sister, Jill, used to tease him by stealing my letters to him from the breakfast table and refusing to hand them over until he gave her 1 rupee. The family quite literally opened their arms to me, calling me Annie from the start. Anand's mother dipped her finger into a pot of thick liquid and placed a red spot on my forehead. Her welcome was as warm as could be, and I had to pinch myself to realize this was really happening to me. Already far away, England seemed very chilly, and the English very literally buttoned up.
Thank you. That was such a trip down memory lane, and I think one of the things that I enjoyed so much about the book was the whole family story. And I felt like I fell in love with your family, your Indian family, who was so welcoming, who's sitting right here. Reading the book, one feels that I know you all. So it was really, really well done. And what was also very interesting was that it captured a specific time in history which is forgotten. And as a resident Mumbaiker myself, I really love that slice of Bombay that you brought to life. So you came to Bombay in the 60s, and the book really chronicles your time as a young girl in England, and then as a young bride, and then how you built your life here. So let's go back to the beginning. The book is really, really bold. You talk a lot about your relationships with your parents, with your children, with your grandchildren, and from settling down to moving to Bandra later on in life. And you also mentioned Georgina Brown and the whole process of writing the book and how she got so interested in your life, as who wouldn't be. So could you tell the audience a little bit more about how the whole process of putting this book came together with Georgina?
I think I've had a fascinating life, but I could never understand that anybody else might think it was interesting. And I certainly never wanted to write about it. And so it really happened rather by accident. Georgina was the wife of the British Deputy High Commissioner here, and she'd been here for a year, and she was bored, I was told. I was told she was a writer, and she was bored, so I put two and two together and thought I'll ask her to write about Apna LA, which is the charity I'm involved with, and we're always looking for people to write. So I phoned her up, and she invited me for a cup of tea at 3:30 in the afternoon. I've got a diary entry still to remind me. And I left about 3 hours later, having signed up for her to write about me rather than to write about Apna LA. She was fascinated by India. She absolutely loved it. And she wanted to know more. And in her 1 year of being the High Commissioner's wife, she hadn't managed to meet people who could answer all the questions she wanted to ask about India. She bought herself a second-hand car, and she's driving around Bombay, and she was trying to find things out. So she started asking me about India and about my life here, and she and I came from a very similar background, so she couldn't understand how I could move from the swinging 60s in London, the Beatles and Carnaby Street and Mary Quant and miniskirts, and a lot was going on at that time, and come to Bombay, which in the mid-60s was a very, very different place from what it is now, with nothing available, shortages, and in many ways a very simple lifestyle. So we started on these sessions. I would go a couple of times a week, and we'd spend 2 or 3 hours talking, and she would record on her iPhone. I think part of the genius of this book is that from hours and hours, because we did it for over a year, all these recordings, and then suddenly she had to leave because of COVID. Back in England during lockdown, she managed to sort through these hours of rather wandering questions and answers and talks and discussions and make a book out of it. So that's how it came about. All along, I never believed it would actually get published. I thought it was a fantasy in her mind. She'd never written a book. She was a theatre critic. And so she was very excited about it and very enthusiastic. But I thought, goodness me, how do we ever get a book out of all this. And then
He talks a lot, so
Yeah.
I think that for her, having thousands of hours of voice notes and footage is very easy.
I'm very curious about what was left out. I'd love to access all of that. Maybe there's another book in there.
no, sometimes I said this is off the record.
Okay, so one thing that I was very curious about, and I'm sure readers will be, is the whole trigger point of you moving to Bombay was the love story between you and your husband, who's sitting right here. So could you tell us how it all began? How did you meet Annabel, Mehta? What were those first few sparks?
Oh, well, really have to be candid. I always say it was a foggy night in London town. We were both at LSE. Anand was doing still undergraduate economics, and I was doing a non-graduate 2-year diploma in social administration, which was a basic training for social work. And I hadn't known a soul when I went to LSE, so I talked to anybody I was sitting next to, and I talked to a couple of West Indian guys one day, and we became friends. And every Friday night at LSE, they used to have what was known as a hop. Nobody would know what a hop was now, but a hop was a sort of informal get-together in the 3 Tons bar. So Bert and his friend Jake said, come, we're going to the hop. So I went to the hop, and it was a very foggy night, so not many people turned up. But they introduced me to their friend Anand Mehta. And we started talking. And I think, do you remember? We talked for a long time, and then the next day we continued talking, and here I am 58 years, no, more than that, over 60 years later, still talking.
And the book is dedicated to Grandpa as well.
Love that answer. Thank you. I mentioned it before, the book is very raw. It also touches upon some very hard moments of your life as well. So actually this question is directed towards Sara. I'm sure there were a lot of things that you learned about your grandmom and your grandmom's family that you didn't know before. So what were your first impressions of the book, and is there something that you learned that you didn't know before?
I think the book firstly was a very easy read. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. Granny has told me almost all of the stories from the book because she loves to talk, as I mentioned, and she loves sharing all kinds of anecdotes from her life. So I really did enjoy reading the book. What I learned, I think I'd say that you always think of the West to be extremely progressive and us as Indians to be a little bit more traditional, but in the book I kind of found that my English side of the family was a little bit more traditional, and when Granny moved to India, Grandpa's side of the family, on the contrary, was extremely accepting of everything, and they were actually much more progressive. So I think that's something that I learned.
Yeah, I found it quite remarkable as well, in the 60s, for such a liberal family, so progressive. And coming back to you, Annabel, the bungalow that you lived in, the Mehta's bungalow in Breach Candy, that is almost like a character. There's people running in and out, the smell of jasmine, it's right next to the sea. I mean, I could almost visualize it. I know it's not around anymore, but I almost wish it existed and we could all take a tour of it. But you were exposed to a very different kind of Bombay, sort of an upper class milieu. So what were your first impressions of, the city in India?
Oh, goodness me. It's the sun shining for a start. Oh, sorry. Anyone who knows England well knows that the sun doesn't very often shine. So come to India and it's light, it's open, the doors and windows are open, people are out in the streets. Most people are smiling. So it was the sun, it was the light, colour. I love colour, so much colour. I mean, you seldom see two people wearing the same thing in India. Whereas if you go to London, Marks and Spencer's, you'll see 3 people on Oxford Street wearing the same coat. The smells, the flavours, I mean, there was so much about India that I think it just captivated me straight away. And I think because I was the youngest of 4 children, brought up during and after the war in difficult times, I'd learnt to sort of keep below the radar, to go with the flow. And so I just, when I came here, I just went with the flow and still am flowing.
Yeah, it's really remarkable how you went with the flow and then you made so many friends and your work as well. So I'd like to speak a little bit about your work right now. Your work with the NGO Apna Le, who we worked with for many years. So in the book you say, I arrived in Bombay knowing lots about both the theory and practice of social work in England, but quickly discovered that India was a very different world. Having learned about the non-directive approach, we used it when venturing into new communities. So your NGO worked in some of the slums of Shivaji Nagar and you also chronicle a lot of heartbreaking stories. So what is the biggest thing that you've learned when it comes to empowering the urban poor?
I have to start by saying I found this the most difficult chapter to write. Georgina did the writing, and then there were lots of back and forwards between us, editing, taking things out, putting things in. And this chapter, I think she'd found difficult to write. I mean, how do you write about something that's occupied me for 50 years of my life here, and which is so different from what most people knew of me and had experienced? So this was a difficult chapter to write, and it's quite a difficult question to answer. So I made 1 or 2 notes to myself. I think, the biggest thing that I learned as to what we as an NGO should be doing was to help people to acquire the knowledge, skills and confidence to address the issues that impact their lives. And that's what I think we tried to do. We worked in initially 4 slum communities that we were able to move out of when they were rehoused, and we've been working there for 25, 30 years. But we're still in Shivaji Nagar, which is Bombay's 2nd biggest slum after Derby, and still very bad. And so I think what we're now trying to do is to help people to help themselves. Sounds very trite when you say it like that, but to empower people. That sounds better these days, doesn't it? To empower them, to give them the ability to help improve their lives, change their circumstances, move up out of grinding poverty. But I was distressed to read in the newspaper only 2 days ago, the latest UN report this week says that in India, 234 million people are still living in extreme poverty. And the conditions in Shivaji Nagar, parts of Shivaji Nagar, are still as bad as they were 50 years ago. So there's a long way to go. We were trying to make this a bit of a fun evening, so that's probably enough about Apna. Read the chapter.
It's remarkable work, so that chapter is very, very important. Okay, so coming to the little bit of the fun part, the story is not complete without the remarkable love story between your daughter Anjali and living legend Sachin Tendulkar, and how you became known as Sachin ki saas, and your life completely changed. And you have traveled along with the kids to tournaments, and as a fan, it was just so brilliant to get an insight into his life, which probably we wouldn't have got, because it's through your perspective. So, what were some of your first impressions of your son-in-law?
He's very small. I don't know, you always imagine your daughter marrying somebody tall, dark and handsome. Well, he's dark and handsome, but certainly not tall. I can picture the first time I saw him walking into our house, he was wearing a khaki shirt and khaki pants and he was always carrying his 2-in-1 they were called 2-in-1s, what were they called in those days? And he smelt of a delicious aftershave. So that was another impression. And the fact that he was so shy he couldn't hardly look at me as he walked past. And he remains shy. He only really relaxes with people he knows well. Other than that, I think you all know as much about him as I do almost. And maybe if you read the book, you'll learn a few little inside bits.
Yes, there's some lovely, the wedding scenes are really beautiful. You chronicle that very, very well. Okay, so you said you never thought the book would be published, but here we are at your book launch. So how did that whole journey come about? We met Jayapriya, your agent. So what was that roller coaster of getting it published?
Goodness me, it was a roller coaster. As I say, I never, I don't think I ever took it really seriously. So that all the hitches along the way didn't worry me too much. They worried Georgina much more because she was so keen. She was the creative one. While we were recording, she was so determined that it was going to be published that she went about trying to find an agent. I don't know how she found you, Jaya, but she found an agent. And then our agent, our wonderful agent, found a publisher, Westland publisher. I mean, as these things happened, I couldn't believe it. But there were big gaps between each stage of this. And then the publisher gives you an editor. But there were ups and downs all along between this. Then all sorts of things happened. The publishing company, we were told, was being sold. And for a long time, there was nobody buying Westland. So, we thought everything had gone again. And then it was bought. And then we learned they bought the manuscripts in process and taken the editor as well. So we were back to work again and more editing and back and forth. And then, something else would happen and it would be held up again. And I mean, I can't tell you, anyone who's thinking of writing a book, don't. It's impossible to get things published. Although there are one or two who've managed it here tonight. But anyway, thank you, Jaya, for your belief in the book and for getting us through what was a very challenging journey.
I think for those of us in the publishing community, it was a very big blow, the whole Westland thing, but then, it all got sorted out. I'm so happy because we would have books like yours to enjoy. Okay, so I can go on and I have a lot of questions, but I'm sure everybody sitting in the audience has a lot of questions as well. So let's open it up to your questions. Yes. Do we have a mic that we can ask?
All that fun topic here, but it is really interesting to hear you talk about that. I wanted to know, just as an English woman going to these areas and working with on the issues that you mentioned, did you face any opposition, or did people think that you're being condescending or anything like that, coming in to tell people how to improve their lives or empower themselves?
I'm an extremely bad linguist, so that meant that I wasn't usually the front person in interaction with the communities where we worked initially. I picked up some terrible Hindi along the way, but I've never...
You sang that song pretty well.
had it written down. One of the things that amazed me when I first came to India was the fact that we'd been at LSE during actually at a rather boring time, but when anti-colonial feeling was riding fairly high and a lot of countries were getting or had got independence. So I thought when I came here I would feel anti-British sentiment, maybe anti-white sentiment. And in all the years I've been here, I only once experienced anybody saying, go back where you came from. And that was in a queue to buy chicken at Crawford Market many years ago. She thought I was queue barging, I think. When I first started going into slums with small children, their reaction was to cry because of my eyes. Until Aishwarya Rai came along, light eyes were not common commonly seen in India. And so children were frightened of my eyes sometimes. But otherwise, I don't think I ever felt the sentiment you're expressing of, people coming and tell them what to do, because that's not the way Upnally ever worked. What we've always tried to do was this non-directive approach. You go in, first of all, you see whether people actually want you to be there or not. And when I say we, as I say, I was one of a group of people. There were mainly 3 of us, two Indians and myself, who did most of the front work in the early years. But I don't think if you're sensitive, I don't think you would put yourself in a position where you were resented. Does that answer?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Auntie, I just actually wanted to ask you, you were asked a question about your remarkable son-in-law, but I also think you're mother to an absolutely brilliant daughter who, through the years you've seen her grow right from her childhood, adapting to so many things in her life, and then the role she's played in Sachin's life, and now as a grandmother, you see how she's evolving again. Why don't you tell us a little bit about her, something that we still don't know?
Oh gosh, she's another very private person. She won't want me to, to tell you much. I can only say that both she and her father always encouraged me to do my own thing. And if my own thing was up in LA, I had 100% support from them. Angeli was always a sensitive child. And if you read the book, if you don't already know, you'll learn from it that she had a sister who was 18 months younger, who died when Angeli was 8 and Tara was 7. And I think that probably changed her life a little bit. And so she's, as those of you who know her well know, she went into medicine, took it very, very seriously, was a gold medalist. And I mean, I shall never forget the sight of her in JJ Hospital Pediatric Ward with a little NNK. What was that little, what was that little guy called? A little baby, tucked under one arm, stethoscope round the neck. And living in JJ Hospital doing your postgraduate is not much fun. But Angeli did it, and she did it with great, and some of you in the audience, including the Aparna who asked the question, with great dedication, with great humanity. And I admire that in my daughter as I do in her friends sitting here. I only, this wretched cricketer came along and took her away from medicine.
I'm going to ask one question, and how would you have felt if Anjali had married someone from a different country? It must have been very difficult for your mom to let go of you. How did that work out at your mom and your bond with your mom? I mean, Anjali clearly married some guy.
That's an interesting question. I and my brothers and my sister were all sent away to boarding school, which was the norm in the UK for the sort of family that I came from in those days. So my brothers were sent away at the age of 7. I was sent away at the age of 10. And partly because I was the youngest of 4 children and it was war and post-war and things, I was never terribly close to my mother, which I think also comes out in the book. So I went away to boarding school at 10, absolutely loved it. I loved boarding school. I got away from my awful brothers who used to tease me a lot. and made friends which are friends to this day in the UK, friends from school. And so, I mean, who I married, I don't know that it would have made all that much difference. My sister went off and settled in America. She's still in California. She was 6 years older than me, never married. And I came to India, and I mean, even if I'd been working in London, I don't think I'd ever received, because they lived 100 miles away from London, I wouldn't have seen that much of her. So I don't think the fact that I married and came to India was too much of an issue on that score. But it was quite an issue that I was marrying an Indian and going to a foreign country, and my parents didn't come for the wedding. Not a single member of my family came for my wedding. Not because they said they disapproved, just that it was a long way to come and very expensive, and they'd come when I'd settled. That was what I was told.
Thank you.
You asked if I'd have minded if I eventually had married a foreigner and lived abroad. Of course I would have hated it. She runs my life for me.
Auntie, I want to ask you a question. I know you are an active grandmother to Sara and Arjun. And so could you talk a little bit about how you evolved being a grandparent and a grandmother versus when you were raising Anjali and, of course, Sara?
Oh, no comparison. It's worth, I tell you, those of you who don't have children, because if you have children, you have grandchildren if you're lucky. Grandchildren are the best thing that ever happens to you. Really. Ask any grandmother. And we were extremely lucky because she was living in Bombay, not living in London or New York or Singapore or Adelaide. And we were able to, because Sachin was away a lot, Anjali was on her own, and so we decided from the start we'd be hands-on, useful grandparents. You see, if you're useful, then people actually want you around. So we did a little thinking, and especially, when a second one comes along, I was usually the one told to look after Sara, take her away, entertain. It wasn't difficult because she always entertained me. But Arjun was also quite sickly, so there were times when it was, I think, quite useful to have us around. Very special, very, very special.
Hello. Hi, Sara. This is Vinay. We listen to so much stories and we enjoy it. But apart from that, if I want to ask one of the person whose biopic you want to read, anything in a written version, so who is the one and why?
So not related to...
Yeah, apart from that.
I think my grandfathers. Or both grandfathers would be nice, yeah.
Why?
Because this grandfather who's sitting right here, grandpa, he's quite shy and quiet. So it's usually Granny that does all the talking, and I've heard a lot of stories about Granny, and I've heard stories about Grandpa through Granny, but it would be really nice to hear stories about him and his childhood. And of course my other grandfather, who I only really met for 1 year of my life, and then he passed away. So I don't know him much. I remember him just a little bit, so it would be really nice to also know more about his life.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you for being a role model to girls who were associated with Anjali. You were our mentor, our second mom, and I can speak for everyone. You cooked for all of us. You helped us settle our rooms, gave us guidance. You were the highlight of our lives. And anyone who can handle me.
I felt so sorry for them. I used to take them beer and tandoori chicken from the road outside JJ.
One day my mom told me, I'm so jealous, you know, you don't treat me as well as you're always talking about Anjali's mom. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? I think this was really heartwarming. Thank you so much, Annabel. Thank you so much, Sara. We really got to know you. And yeah, one more question. Yeah. Okay. We're doing a media fight now. Question. Yeah. Another question.
Congratulations on the launch of the book. How do you feel having launched this book, and what do you feel right now?
Relieved, slightly intoxicated, I think. I never thought it would see the light of day.
Okay, what are the things that motivated you while you were settling in India? Things about your life. What motivated you?
Love. I came here because I was in love with my husband to be. I was positive from the start. I had known him for 3 years in the UK. I'd met a lot of his friends. I was positively orientated to settle here, and I was so warmly greeted right from the start that I had no problem.
Thank you so much. One last thing, any message you would like to give your readers about the book that they can take away from it?
I think be thankful if you have an interesting life. I've never been bored. There's so much to interest me in India. And don't think too much about yourself. Look at the world outside you, and in India there's so much to look at.
Thank you so much. Sara, anything about the book that you'd like to also tell the readers about?
I mean, I think that they should go and buy the book and read it, of course, to really understand the person that she is. And I mean, I'm not being biased because she's my grandmother, of course, but she really has led a very interesting life. So I think if you read it, you'll understand the kind of woman that she is. And I think I just admire the fact that she could really move from one end of the world to another so seamlessly, and she's just fit right in. So I think that's something that I admire about her.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
अभी फोटो मत लेना. हाँ चलो, थैंक यू.
सारा जी रुकिए.
यहाँ पे सारा जी.
सारा जी ऑन योर लेफ्ट. सारा मैम
क्या
बुक देखने को
ले लो ना, विजुअल देखना चाहिए.
अरे बुक देखने को. थैंक यू मैम.
थैंक यू.
Thank you.
थैंक यू.